Absolutely love the entire Earth portion of Rune, with the exception of a few cards that annoy me, like Hulking Giant and otherwise. But I think it's so interesting. It's a very different style of runecraft. It's not the sort of selfish combo-y, I want to win the game in one turn type. It plays it out carefully, has to consider its opponent's options very carefully. It has a lot of tools of disruption and answers. I think it's a really cool deck overall, and I'm really not surprised to see it actually just be so popular in tournaments lately now that it's gotten the tools that help push it.
Yep. And as we can see, Pain electing to go for the more offensive version of Burn Rune with his Mage of Nightfalls and Levi's and things like that. So Pain, we know he's an aggro player. We didn't expect any less. And I think Fatina knew that. That's why he kind of brought a lot of anti-aggro decks today.
Right. Now, Mage of Nightfall I find really interesting because there's like two different sort of game plans I've seen people develop with Burn Rune lately. One being one that tries to go a little bit more towards the late game. They're fine with letting games go on as long as their opponent is willing, and then they just slam like Mutagenic Bolt or something like that out of nowhere, and they're like, "Yep, I win." There's also types like the one we're seeing Pain bring, which is just damage. It is every source of damage you can possibly afford to bring.
That's right. And Mage of Nightfall is an interesting card. I mean, we've talked about this card at length over the course of a few seasons. And is it right to include? Is it bad to include? As we can see it now, it could come out later as a 4 damage card, but right now it's just a 3 play point 3/2. It's nothing specifically good because he didn't get any of his one cost amulets, and it's kind of like a make or break bonus card in the beginning. Do you have your 1-drops? Do you not? Can it be good later? You know, it's kind of in a weird spot, I feel like, but it's not a bad card.
It may be a little bit awkward this game just because usually when I see a player bring Mage of Nightfall, I almost always see it evolve when it hits face. I've never seen it even trade, actually. It's always evolved face. But when you run it in a deck that also, as you see with Pain here, he's already having this interaction. If you also run Time Worn Mage Levi, the older version, then they are competing for your evolve points. So you see him have to throw away a really strong tool there just to develop a pretty good turn 2. But that is a lot of tools in contention in the same deck.
And going back to a previous point before the match even started, playing cards like Mage of Nightfall takes away some of the value from cards like Magic Illusionist, because it will use those sigils, right? And you need a sigil for Halo Golem, and you need a sigil for the Magic Illusionist if you want to stick around. But it's just another way to deal increased damage early and kind of letting go of that late game like you were talking about.
Now, as for a matchup like this, I feel like Mage of Nightfall is a really fantastic way to open a game, because before Dragon has even developed any way to defend itself, as you can see, Fatina is fighting for board, trying to have some kind of presence. He's already being shot down to what could potentially be half his original defense. And at that point, there's a very, very clear path for Burn Rune to start developing.
Ooh, that was a really nice pickup too. And now we just see just straight damage in Pain's hands. So it's about if Fatina can manage this board well enough, while also being able to keep himself healthy enough to not just outright die to burn. However, everything in Pain's hand does cost a lot, so won't be able to unload it all at one time.
Good night.
And we do see, at the very least, the hiding behind his little playpoint window there, the eking edge of an animated Sybil, able to trade in his Ayala to get overflow so that he does heal off of it. I think this is a really huge turn for Fatina.
Yep. Back to 15, solidify board control, and now we come to this point where Magic Illusionist is the big deal. But if Pain wants to start utilizing his cards, he's going to have to start sacrificing these sigils, so.
In addition to his sigil usage here, now here's a card that I've seen actually a lot of people just pack maybe 1, sometimes 2 copies of in tournament play, and this is actually the very first time after casting this deck like 18 times, exaggeration, where I've actually seen it drawn, Twin Guardians. Now, how do you feel about this card in particular?
I think it's great as a one-of. I think in tournament play, you always need to be doing unexpected things to your opponent, because if you play into a formula, then they've played that formula, right? If they've done their testing, their research for the day, then they know what you can possibly do on your turns. If they don't consider this Twin Guardians like Wizard of Oz play, or maybe even just a straight up Twin Guardians next turn, maybe they aren't ready for it. You know what I mean? They weren't ready for that amount of tempo, that amount of pressure, or they weren't expecting that effect, so they threw away a card that they might have needed in that scenario. I really like it as a tech card.
Mm-hmm. I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's actually really amazing that this card suddenly just comes into competitive play because it's been around for as long as RuneCraft has existed, I'm pretty sure. It's one of the very first tools that really defined, and even back in the days of like early classic Shadowverse, this card still didn't see very much play, just because cards like Juno's Secret Laboratory came in. But its synergy with Wizardess of Oz is so interesting. It helps add depth to this deck in a lot of matchups that are otherwise kind of awkward. It's a really cool card.
Yep. And I really like Pain's setup here. So I would 100% Master Mage Levi here.
The name's Levi. Don't forget.
And this basically says, I know you have Bahamut next turn anyway, so my Magic Illusion isn't going to get any more value. Plus I get to clear your board.
It challenges Fatina to go as far as he can in one turn to really finish or come back against the board. But at one glance, we know Fatina did actually manage to assemble his pieces in time.
Yep. He got enough chip damage in the previous turn. Pain losing the aggro damage race to Dragon. And I think it all comes down to just the simple early game plans, like where Fatina gets to ramp and do all the things he wants, Sybil in the mid game. Pain has to like stop, play a sigil, stop, play a 3-drop that then gets benefit from that sigil, and just does everything a little bit slower, right? And without those big swing turns with Wizardess of Oz or any kind of control cards to like stop what your opponent's doing, you're basically just racing your opponent. And sometimes Dragon can do just what we saw, and in essence has been doing it every single time we've seen the Dragon deck, just able to Queen of the Dreadsea super early, even if it doesn't win in the case of, you know, Essia.
Yeah. And in addition to all of that, it's like, how do you really stop the Dreadsea game plan from happening? He had Twin Guardians, which does actually help, but Dreadsea's not really the only card he has to go for. He could just bide his time, deal with the bodies, then play his combo. I think he had a very comfortable game, that one.
Well, that's the double-edged sword, right? Do I play my board full of wards and play right into Bahamut, or do I not and die to the combo? It's a really nice end game that Dragon has now.
Do you feel like if Rune pulls a faster-paced hand, that they can avoid that problem entirely, or does Dragon have enough survivability to kind of even mitigate that?
If Scrap Iron Smelter was played on turn 1, Pain could have easily won that game. But it wasn't, and that simple lack of tempo is all it takes when you're talking about two decks that are just trying to kill you as fast as they can.
Right. As a Dreadsea is a deck, and it's worth mentioning sometimes in terms of like how do you play around it. It does its damage in just a very small number of huge bursts of damage, meaning wards are an actual very effective countermeasure to it. Even small ones like Scrap Iron Smelter.
Even preventing the 1 or 2 extra chip damage in the mid game, or having a ward to pop like half of the combo while also not overcommitting to Bahamut, this gives you all that breathing room that you need.
Now, really interesting here is as we were talking about Magic Illusionist earlier, and about Pain's like attempts to develop the early game, Fatina fully respected that Magic Illusionist, went for the play, even though it was quite a commitment, to not only just fully remove it, but also deny Pain the sigils.
That's right. And I think it plays right into that point. Can I fully remove it, or can I just pop the sigils? And he could fully remove it, so he went all in for it.
Now this is a matchup that I've recently gained a lot of familiarity with, just because I think in NA especially, these two are very, very popular decks. Burn Rune and Mid Shadow, two really consistent game plans. Though, if I were to call it at the exact moment, I think Pain's not actually in that great of a spot, because he has developed a bit of board. But where you really want to be with this deck is you want to have things you know you're going up in towards, especially having like a Master Mage Levi in hand. And right now, he doesn't have resources that do a lot for him immediately.
I would say in my mind, and I've talked about this matchup quite a bit, I think it's still in favor of Burn Rune, but they have to have the specific cards like you're talking about. Without knowing that he has a Wizardess of Oz on top or a Master Mage Levi, his decisions are going to be very important here. I feel like he's just got to push for it and hope he draws into it at this point. I think that's what he's feeling.
I suppose with Wizardess of Oz being such an important piece of the deck, it's always run at 3. hoping that you find it pretty soon isn't really that unlikely of a strategy or something to put your money on. Because, I mean, even in this situation, it's not so bad. He has a board that's very hard to get rid of. Fatina's still playing very reactively towards it. It gives him time to find things like Oz.
And in doing so, emptying out his entire hand, which would seem bad at a glance, but if you draw into your Wizardess, it's the best thing that you can actually be doing.
Ooh.
Now, I don't know if I like not getting the Evo point off on the last Levi and pushing for the extra 2, because essentially he lost the damage by doing that. Yeah, I don't like it. If it comes down to like 1 damage, we'll see. I mean, usually it doesn't in this type of a matchup, but if it does, I mean, it's just small things like that that I feel like you could just correct.
I guess if anything, aiming a Soul Squasher at an Illusionist is less net loss of stats, I think, than aiming it at Levi. But still, not having the Crimson Sorcery when you're still down on resources like this is not ideal for Thane here.
Right. Especially when you have to start contesting with things like Saris.
And Fatina, just knowing what options he has, goes for developing 2 bodies that each now stick at 4 defense, and Magic Illusionist itself can't even trade into one of them. He's very defended against Master Mage Levi.
That's right. Master Mage, like, the last Evo point will have to be used if Saris wants to be taken off the table, and this is kind of like the only card that swung the matchup in my mind. Like, yes, Blade Fiend is really good, but Saris really, just because of the extra innate healing that you get in Shadow that it never had before, I feel like really kind of, if you draw Saris, you're in an amazing position. If you don't draw Saris, it's just like it always has been, and Dirt Rune just kind of runs over you. But Saris, man, my God, I know we talk a lot about this card all the time, but it's so good.
You cannot understate how much Saris has transformed Shadow, I think. I mean, it reads like a legendary to me. It's like a card that just completely drops everything the class was doing before. This is now possible. The way I kind of compare it to other cards in my head is it's kind of like a Scarlet Sabrewer for this class. It is adept at removing annoying threats. It is, I mean, even unlike Sabrewer, little things can't trade into her, and you get that healing from her. It's such a huge impact on the game that you just can't ignore it. And a lot of classes just fall over against it.
Yeah, like, look at the amount of resources. Like, played the Master Mage Levi, might not necessarily wanted to play that this turn, probably did, but then has to use the Evo point in order to kill a 1/1. A 1/1. You know, that never feels good.
Right. That gives Fatina the shadows he needs to just simply develop an Ixter, and now Pain's just completely out of resources.
Yep. And this is where we see the God Wizard's Vase draws, or we don't, and we see Pain kind of start fading here.
Another Master Mage doesn't really put him in that great of a spot. Comparable, if anything, to a Hector that doesn't need the hand setup here.
Right. And Fatina can just start playing towards the long game. I mean, if the Master Mage Levi comes down, then just trade easy with the Akhtar, play a Thane, and then once that Thane hits the board, yikes. We've seen Thane in endgame situations. It gets pretty rough after that.
This is absolutely the sweet spot, I'd like to say, for Shadow. I think it's interesting because mid-range is it's an archetype where its existence in Shadowverse tends to always be a little bit here or there. Like, Sword, its mid-range deck is still struggling to really find its place, but Shadow has such an immense ability to end games around this spot. Once it hits that magic number of 7, that every single turn between Ixter and Thane, that's just, most classes just can't deal with the end, like this unending onslaught of both value and pressure it can put on.
Right. Especially when you start getting into the combos with Soul Conversion on Thane and dealing extra damage and playing multiple Thanes. I mean, it gets to this really weird endgame. And it looks like Pain's just going to fold to this one. He sees the writing on the wall.
Time and time again, Fatina shows that he is an absolute terror. A beast. I think Burn Rune displayed a not super fantastic performance today.
Well, I think it's realistically the inclusion of Mage of Nightfall. Had Mage of Nightfall